I don't care what people are saying online. Glickid or Gladiator or whatever, it's not going to be the next Barbenheimer. Stop making it the next Barbenheimer. Granted, I'm reviewing both movies at the same time, but still. Hi, welcome to Film Stash. My name is Douglas Campbell. I hope you guys enjoyed your Thanksgiving. It was full of fun turkey and food and interesting family stories you never want to speak of again. Today I will be covering both Gladiator 2 and Wicked. The timestamps for each review is going to be right here. Without further ado, let's start with Gladiator 2. Years after Maximus's death, Lucius, played by Paul Mescal, must enter the Colosseum after his new home is conquered. With rage in his heart, he looks to the past to find the strength and honor needed to return Rome to its people. Before I even dive into Gladiator 2, I should probably start off with my thoughts on the original Gladiator. I saw it not too long ago because I was going to cover it for a Film Stash episode, but then I kind of got sick, and so I had to just remove that from the plan altogether. The original film I thought was just okay. It was a just okay film that was good only because it was bolstered by the strong performances that was Russell Crowe's Maximus and Joaquin Phoenix. And that combined with the spectacle, it made it a really memorable film that I quite enjoyed quite a bit. And so fast forward 20 plus years later, the director Ridley Scott, he's bringing us back to his iteration of Rome with Gladiator 2. Going into the positives, if we're talking about scope alone, this film, it's on par or even better to a degree than the first film. Like, Ridley Scott really pulls you back into his iteration of Rome. It's crazy. Like, it's really cool seeing, especially considering how numb I've kind of grown to bigger spectacle movies just because they're more CG focused than anything. I think the fact that they do use mostly real locations mixed in with the CG, it helps with my immersion of the film. And even though the plot, it is very basic, similar to the first one to a degree, although I think it's even more basic yet a little more complicated than the original. I'll get to that later. I do think that the spectacle and the stunts, it really makes up for the shortcomings that this film has. I do think that the performances also bolster up this movie quite a bit. You do have Paul Mescal as Lucius. He's not as intriguing as Maximus, but I do think that the performance shines through. And then you have a great villain with Denzel Washington as Macrinus. Like, he is a different kind of scummy that it contrasts greatly to Joaquin Phoenix, and I definitely think that he fits within the world perfectly, but in a different kind of way. Granted, he is playing Denzel Washington again, like he is for a lot of his other roles, but Denzel Washington's great at what he does. Like, he could just keep doing what he's doing. He's great. Unfortunately, going into the mix, I'd say that this story, it's incredibly mixed. It is not my favorite aspect of this movie at all. Where with the first film, you could argue it's incredibly basic. We've seen the story time and time again. It at least had a basic forward momentum because you want to see Russell Crowe get revenge. There it is. That's your plot. But with this movie, unfortunately, even though we are following Lucius, like, his motivation is kind of all over the place. You think he wants to get revenge for his wife. You think he wants to get revenge for what happened to his homeland. You think he wants to get payback on his mom. The motivation just isn't clear, and his character as a whole, whenever you see him in action, he's serviceable, but he feels very passive as a character. He's just kind of along for the ride, even though some of these things happen to him. They try to play off Lucius's role as kind of a twist. They try to play it off as like, oh, we don't know who this guy is. We don't know who this guy is. Like, at least from the POV of the audience, as well as the characters within the Colosseum. In fact, if you haven't been living under a rock, you know that he is the son to Lucilla from the first movie. You kind of waste a lot of time for the beginning and the middle. I don't know why you made a non-twist be a twist in this movie. On top of that, the movie itself is very bloated because it doesn't know if it wants to spend its time with Lucius, or with Denzel Washington and his plot, or Lucilla as she's trying to plot yet another rebellion, or even Pedro Pascal and what he's doing with Lucilla. Oh my god. So Pedro Pascal as Marcus, I thought he was great. He really brought that gravitas that the character needed, and he kind of resembled Maximus in a lot of ways. His character gets so wasted in this movie. They tease kind of a dynamic between him and Lucius, kind of similar to Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix, that I thought was interesting. The difference this time is that Marcus is on Lucius's side, yet Lucius doesn't know. And so they're kind of pitting these two up to eventually fight each other. And that seems like a great idea that could honestly be played for the whole movie. They quickly extinguish that idea as it's getting started. Like, nothing really comes from it, unfortunately. And so it's kind of wasted. And diving into the negatives here, I feel like with how aimless this plot is overall, like, the spectacle aside, it's still an aimless story. It was way too long at 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours is a commitment. So this one, it's going to be a bit of a spoiler, so heads up, here's your spoiler alert now. They retcon something very important from the first movie that ultimately, I think, ruins the integrity of Maximus a little bit. Maximus is very committed to his wife. He wants nothing but to go home to his wife and his kid and just enjoy the rest of his days just being a farmer. Lucilla, she keeps doing advances towards him, and the fact is, he keeps turning her down. Like, hey, look, I have this thing at home. I don't want to be with you. I, at the very least, would maybe want to be a senator. I don't want to be an emperor. Sorry, I'm not interested in you. They retcon it to where 7 years ago, before the first Gladiator started, they screwed, and ultimately Lucilla's kid, who's the same age as Maximus's kid, Lucius is Maximus's son. What? That really ruins the character for him a bit. For a legacy sequel, I think it does what a lot of other legacy sequels do, in that it's just way too overstuffed for its own good, where if you picked at least maybe 1 or 2 elements, you could have had something that would have stood on equal ground with the original. For what it is, it's just okay. I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. I hope you're enjoying this video so far, so please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Any help will be greatly appreciated. And now, let's get back to the stash. Misunderstood for her green skin, Elphaba, played by Cynthia Erivo, forges an unlikely friendship with popular student Glinda, played by Ariana Grande. Following an encounter with the Wizard of Oz, their friendship reaches a crossroad. So growing up, I've read the Wizard of Oz book, like, God, I don't know how many times I've read it. I read it a lot. And I have heard of the Wicked musical over the years, but I haven't actually seen anything about it or know what it's about. To say that I know nothing about it, it's an overstatement. The only thing I've heard about it recently before actually seeing the movie was one of my roommates. They mentioned some scenes from the original book, which I have here. And kind of hearing those scenes, it just sounded like a weird fan fiction. Regardless of that though, I wanted to give the film a fair shake, and I'm glad that I did, because I had such a good time with Wicked. Going into the positives here, the only way that this story could work is the dynamic between Elphaba and Glinda. And thankfully, Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, they showed up to work. I can't explain how great they both are in the roles. I don't have a point of comparison for Erivo, but I do have a point of comparison for Grande. And I don't think she's not really the best actress. I do think the role of Glinda, it really suits to her musical and comedic strengths that I've seen from her over the years. When it comes to what this film is about, which is ultimately the rise and fall of a friendship, and you do see this paradigm shift from the beginning to the end, it is an incredibly well-paced film that I think shows in a pretty realistic way with how it's portrayed, just how this friendship could possibly happen. As long as we're talking about musicals, like, I am not a musical guy. I do like me some musicals, I do like me some of the tunes, but A lot of musicals, I feel, they just kind of bug me in some ways. Not all the songs work. It just feels like it's extra padding. It's not a medium for me. With how the film uses the musical numbers, like, there's not a bit of wasted space. Like, it does suit all the characters and it progresses the plot forward. It's very purposeful in how they go about the musical numbers. It's not a folie à deux about it. Some musicals that get adapted to film, they just don't know how to make that leap. And I think what Wicked does really well is they utilize the medium that they're in now. They know they don't have to perform it to the back of the house, so they have like more subtler scenes. They allowed the camera to linger and sort of marinate on the emotions that are at play, especially with Cynthia Erivo. Because they realize, hey, this is a musical film and we need things to be crazy also, otherwise people will get bored. They form choreography for the camera work that kind of goes along with all these moves, and it really is energetic. It is just so contagious, this energy. It captured the feel of a live performance, but in a movie. Even to go beyond the musical, one of the things with Oz is that you can't beat the original 1939 film. You just can't. And a lot of Oz adjacent films, they kind of run into that problem where they kind of want to be a spiritual successor or a spiritual prequel, or they want to be connected to it. When it comes to most of the Oz stories, they are public domain, but the 1939 film is not. So you're kind of playing this game of legal limbo of like, oh, how low can I go? How close can I get without actually crossing the line? And that's something that films like Oz the Great and Powerful certainly came across. With this film, I feel like they made their own version of Oz. Certainly homages the film that came before, but it also exists in its own kind of world where it's mostly inspired by Art Deco designs with its buildings and the outfits, and it is so beautiful to look at. When it comes to the mixed, this is a light spoiler, so fast forward a couple seconds if you don't want anything spoiled at all on Wicked. When it comes towards the catalyst for Elphaba's turn, it relates to the talking animals of Oz and how they're starting to be used as scapegoats for all of Oz's problems politically. I thought it was an interesting take, and I don't know if this is what it's like in the original book or even in the Broadway show, using essentially a shared experience and empathy, making that be the catalyst for her turn into what Oz considers the radical dark side. I thought it was an interesting approach. I would have liked to see just how specifically Oz was shooting this propaganda out into the general masses for these animals. But at the same time, I understand you gotta relegate more time for the relationship between Glinda and Elphaba, because if you don't have that as the main driving point, then the tragedy of it just doesn't hit home as hard. So I kind of get that you give more attention to that versus the general political landscape of Oz. And going into the negatives here, I really can't comment on that just yet, because ultimately this movie is incomplete. This is part one of a two-part saga, and now I have to wait a whole year basically to follow it up. I'm just gonna put a pin in there. If there's one thing I could critique that's not even plot related at all, I do think with the cinematography, like, there are so many beautiful colors like all throughout Oz. The problem, at least in my opinion, is that I don't know if it's because they're trying to hide some bad visual effects, but the colors are very muted. For most of the runtime, these colors are very muted. It's like slightly overexposed by the sun. Maybe it's to make it look more real. My showing, it ended like roughly 1:30ish in the morning. Like, it was late, and I was just so energized and just feeling it that, like, I could have sat down for another 2.5 hours to watch part two. Like, I was that into it. In the end, if you're not sure about musicals, I'd say check it out. If you are into musicals, you probably did check it out 5 times. Just check it out. It's really good. This gets like an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10 for me. As a double feature, Glicked doesn't work at all. Like, I don't know why people keep doing this. Tons of big movies get released all the time on the same day, and we don't make Barbenheimers out of those. The only way I guess you could say that these films connect is that at the center of both of these stories is a fight. It's a fight for tomorrow. And with these movies, you have two ideologies present. You have one side that wants a better future for all, and on the other side, you have people at the top that want an easier future for themselves, where the people who will be truly affected the most are targeted citizens. If you keep that in mind, if you want to make this a double feature, it does work better than Barbenheimer, I suppose. Not really. Not really. Well, that's all the time we have for today here at Film Stash. My name is Douglas Campbell, and if you excuse me, I gotta add to the stash.